What's up, YouTube? I've got some exciting news to bring you today. One of my favorite survival games of the past few years is not dead. Well, dead is probably a little dramatic way of putting it, but the devs, Perun Creatives, have admitted that they tend to go radio silent for months at a time, but that the game is still actively being worked on. Hobo Tough Life is getting another update, or more technically speaking, a news update for an upcoming update. Before we get into all the Hobo news, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any Hobo Tough Life news and content. And stay tuned to the very end where we're going to take a look at Perun Creatives' new game, or at least what minimal information we currently have. Now, I've seen a lot of questions regarding whether or not Hobo Tough Life is on console, and sadly it is not. Until now. We actually have a rough time frame when Hobo Tough Life will be coming to console. One of the devs has commented the absolute best case scenario is late April 2022. But that mid-May is much more likely. It will be coming to all console platforms, including Switch and Steam Deck. Now, I personally don't play on console, but I'm very excited for everyone who will now be able to play the game. They're also adding cross-platform when the game drops on console, so you'll be able to play with your friends across consoles. It's also important to note that it's coming to not just the new generation consoles, but the last generation as well. So if you have an Xbox One or a PS4, you'll still be able to play. Now, the rest of the news the devs gave us were a bit smaller updates. Firstly, they're updating some language translations specifically for our Chinese, German, Russian, and Polish speakers. They also announced they'll be adding Japanese, Spanish, and French languages into the game. Now, this probably won't affect many of you, but definitely a great thing to have added. They're also better optimizing the game for performance improvements, bug fixes, faster load times, etc. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, that it's not really a big content update though, which I agree. For you vets out there who have played Hobo Tough Life, this update probably doesn't do much for you, but I actually spoke with the devs regarding any future content updates or DLC, and they said the possibility of a big content update, maybe a DLC, is not out of the question completely. There have been talks about this. So unfortunately, there's nothing planned at the moment, but I'm hoping that once the console update is released, they'll turn their attention to new DLC. It seems that a lot of the devs' focus has been on A, pushing out Hobo Tough Life on consoles, and B, their new game. There's a whole side of the map that hasn't been touched yet, so I'd love to be able to explore the area across the river called Old Town. Perun Creatives' new project is currently named, and I know I'm going to absolutely butcher this, Project Jatrinka. Like I mentioned before, we only have minimal information at this time, but let's take a look at what we do know. Perun Creatives mentions that it'll be a cross-genre hybrid game, which means a game that basically combines two different genres, so think survival and horror, or RPG and shooter, etc. Knowing what type of game Hobo Tough Life is, I think we could rule out certain genres like shooters, RTS, puzzle, etc. In my opinion, the first half of the cross-genre game will likely be survival, since that's what they did with Hobo Tough Life. But the big question is, what's the other half? So Jatrinka in Czech means morning star, which could have some relation to the type of game. Morning star can mean three things. One, and more in the literal sense, a bright star or planet seen from the east in the morning, for example Venus. Number two, and still in the more literal sense, a medieval weapon that's a mace with spikes around the head. Or number three, and my favorite speculation, which is another name for Lucifer, aka the devil. I'd imagine numbers 1 and 2 are too literal, so number 3 is the more likely if, and that's a big if, the project name has anything to do with the genre of the game coming out. Now let's take a look at some of the early environmental concept art and sketches. The first image looks to either be a road or a stream that runs across a hilly landscape with some dead trees. Not really much context for us to dig into. The second image shows us what looks to be some farmland complete with a house or barn surrounded by fencing with what appears to be a bridge into either a city or a forest. The third image is similar to the first and only shows us more rolling hills with dead trees and fencing. Now the fourth and fifth images are where things get really interesting. The fourth image shows us what appears to be a small creek or river running next to a farmland with a dock in the distance. The interesting thing though is what is across this river. There isn't much detail to make out, but it looks ritualistic whatever it is. Either cultists standing around an altar, or just an ancient ceremonial ruin similar to Stonehenge. I'm curious what you think it looks like. The fifth and final image gives me some serious horror vibes. I mean, what more do you need to point at horror? Ominous woods, spider webs, and a shadowy figure with glowing eyes in the background. So if I had to guess, the general idea of the game is a survival horror game where the horror aspect of it is cultists who worship the devil or demons similar to the game Outlast. It's probably way too early at this point to make a good guess, but who knows. I spoke with one of the devs and they said they may have some teasers ready by the end of the year. What do you all think though? Do you think it'll be survival horror? Or maybe something totally different that I'm just not seeing and they're throwing me off the scent with the ominous concept art? Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, I hope you liked the video. See you next time, YouTube.